What is the real role of robots in fulfillment centers? We're about to find out in my conversation today with Craig Hendry. He is U.S. Industry Manager for Intralogistics at Siemens Industry. Hi, Craig.
Hey Bob, how are you?
I'm good, thank you so much for being with me today. So, in fulfillment centers today, just how vital are robots and automation?
Well, if you think about a fulfillment center being totally manual, that would be a difficult process. And as we've seen, there's been an increase in customer demand and the changing landscape of demand. And without automation, I don't know how you could possibly survive without having the tools of automation and robotics. So I'd say it's absolutely essential, is the short answer.
Well, I mean, what the word automation means, I mean, warehouses have had conveyors and machines and things like that that could be classified as some variation on automation.
True.
But we're not talking about that now, we're talking about something much more sophisticated,
yes,
are we not?
We're talking about bringing it to well, up to date, to the bested breed of what automation and robotics can bring. That's the discussion I think we should have, which is not just have we mechanized or have we automated to make something a little bit faster, a little bit better. Where can we go with this, and what is the real role? And that's, I think, what would be a great topic to discuss.
But on the other hand, robots have been around for 60 years or more, so what is it about, what's uniquely different about their use today?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now robots, I think initially, there was a throughput improvement that you can gain from robots. And there's also the ability to potentially reduce the labor in a particular operation. But what we're finding now is that there are some other ways that robotics and automation can help us. One of them is the instant response to change. Whereas an employee base may not be able to instantly change within a week or a day to changing demand, changing locations for inventory, for example, whereas a fleet of robots can change within a second to have a new path, a new task, and be able to track all of the locations. So that instant response is a key added feature that a robotic and automated system can provide.
How interesting, because the robots from the past in a factory, you look at an arm, it does the same thing again and again, but you're saying now that the robots of today are more flexible,
absolutely,
customizable,
right,
can be used for multiple types of tasks.
Exactly.
Big difference.
Yeah, and they're going to automate, and we have now the mobile robot that is automated, that is freely navigating in some cases. That's key in many fulfillment centers. I know that Amazon has hundreds of thousands of robots that are part of their pick and picking stations. Now the other benefit though that I think is even larger is the fact that there's data being produced. Whereas your workforce of human beings is not going to be producing, hey, here's where I am at all times.
Right.
Here's what's happening, here's what I've just done. With the data that's being produced from automation and robotics, you have an instant, real-time tracking. You have a real-time condition of all systems. You have all the data that can go up to the cloud, and maybe one of the best benefits is with all that data, we now can see patterns and use the new tools of artificial intelligence to say, is this the best way to deploy?
Further optimize.
Change, optimize,
Not just for the moment, but for the future, make it even better.
Absolutely, and you get a flexibility that you didn't have before. So now this becomes a living thing in the digital world, whereas an employee-based system is unable to have that kind of instant change, data produced, and instant, hey, let's try a new method.
That being the case, are robots taking jobs that should have previously been done by humans?
I think this is an archaic notion, this idea that the robots are going to take over and people will be waiting in some kind of soup line. This is not the case. In fact, there's such a labor gap now that it is difficult for warehouse operators and large end users who have their own fulfillment centers to find qualified people. So automation has now become so essential to even get the tasks done because there just isn't a labor pool. This labor gap is enormous. So I'm not seeing this case of, hey, I've lost my job because a robot took it. That's really not the case today. We are seeing that this tool called a robot and this tool of automation is just essential in the same way that the the mechanic who is changing tires at the tire center is using an air wrench.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a lot faster. It's going to be more efficient. It has a torque setting, all of which a human can do, but this is much more efficient. So it's a tool.
On the other hand, we are told by robotics experts that the long game of robotics, somewhere down the line, maybe years ahead, is the lights out warehouse. There's no people in there at all.
Yes.
But not today, and not in the next few years.
Well, there are some cases where there are lights out factories making motors.
And have been for years, indeed.
It is more of an exception though.
Okay.
It really is.
And will remain so for...
It probably will, because I think that the level of automation is still relatively low in the business world. From a computer point of view, Oracle did a study and found that only about 31% of companies have fully automated one business process.
Is that right?
One. And from a factory automation, manufacturing, et cetera, we're perhaps 5% automated in this country, in the United States. 5%. So there's so much that can be done. You know, and it's not automate for the sake of automate. And I think that's important to understand, is that we're going to automate and use robotics to get a benefit. It has to make sense.
Okay.
And that was something actually back in the 80s and 90s when robots had a surge, but often were not fully deployed the way they should be. They created an island of automation, which maybe produced a bunch of parts or was able to operate much faster than the rest of the line, and wasn't balanced. It ended up being a $250,000 boat anchor because it really didn't improve anything. And that gets to the bigger picture of what are we really doing on a larger sense.
Okay, on that theme then, what is a cobot?
Well, a cobot is a shorter name for collaborative robot. And this is a very important piece of what's happening moving forward, which is the collaboration between an employee and a robot. Now the safety concern has been handled with standards that have been around for years, which is to say if there's a human in the reach of a robot, it has to follow certain safety requirements, that if there's contact, for instance, the articulating arm is going to stop. There is no way that the robot is going to strike the human, et cetera. And if the robot is stopped, then it likely has an algorithm that once, maybe a latency period, it's going to start back up and continue its process. But it's going to work alongside and take care of those mundane, continuous tasks and do it in a very repeatable way, a very high quality way. And it allows the human, who has a much more complex computer called his brain, to manage the exceptions, to handle the anomalies that may be seen in that process. And it allows the human to do the more complex, interesting work. And the tool, i.e. the robot and the automation, is there to just do the mundane tasks over and over again. Yeah. And that's not really a new concept.
But even in a warehouse, you see like a partnership going on where the robot might bring the picker to the pick face, and the human picker then picks from somewhere on and gives it to the robot takes it off, and so you both entities are important to that particular.
Exactly. So why would we want our employees to be walking literally miles a day to do what this automated robot can do, an AGV or AMR, however you want to define it. And so we're going to allow the human to be doing the more intelligent work, the work that is variable and maybe more interesting. I think that's a key component.
Yeah. Okay, so how risky an investment though is automation and robotics?
I think it depends. I think, per my example of in the 80s, buying a robot just to say, hey, we've automated this and isn't this high tech is a mistake, and that's a risky endeavor. But I think if you take an overall approach to automation, whether it's in a fulfillment center, manufacturing center, whatever you're doing, take an overall approach saying, what is the model for this? And this is where I recommend, we're moving into a digital world now in a big way, and digitalization is in the annual reports of so many companies right now. Here is how we're moving into the digital world. Well, if you take an approach with a fulfillment center, for example, of making a digital twin of that fulfillment center, and then running various scenarios of how we might deploy robots this way, flexible cells that way, and you can run that without spending a dime on the physical plant. Until you've optimized to say, this is the most flexible way to do this. Once you take an approach like that, then the risk is extremely low because you've run it in software. The tools are available now. You can run it completely in software and say, this is how it's going to run. Let's feed orders to this and see how it does. Let's see how fast we can go.
And those are accurate scenarios if they play out the way that the system says they're going to play out if you adopt them.
Bob, it is incredible, Bob, what we have now with respect to running actual code in controllers in a virtual world
Yeah.
to say this is exactly how it's going to play out. So when you do that, then you know how it's going to play out, and then the risk can be managed, because as much as we'd like to revolutionize the company this year and automate every process, it's not rational that we're going to do that. But if you have a virtual twin, you can put an entire plan together and then decide, we're doing this first, this second, this third, but it's part of an overall strategy.
Yeah.
And you end up with an agility after that to keep going back to that software tool and saying, here's a new implementation. We need more capacity. We run all these scenarios and get the best one, then we implement in the physical world.
Okay.
So if you take that approach, the risk is very low.
So what's the most important piece of advice you would give to companies that are considering getting into automation and robotics?
Well, I'd say make sure that it's part of an overall strategy. An overall strategy that makes sense. And the key word being, you have to remain flexible. There is no normal anymore. The idea of optimization is that there is a best way to do something, and let's optimize processes around that. I think we need to throw that model out, because now change is so constant and at such a great rate, we need the ability to be flexible. So when we automate, we want to be able to put in a system that can handle the demand today, the changing demand tomorrow, and then the changing demand the day after that, so to speak. And so flexibility is the way to go, and systems can handle that today. Don't lock into one way and thinking it's going to be like this for the next 5 years. It's not. It's absolutely not.
Great insights. Thank you so much, Craig, for joining us today to talk about the future, present, past, future of robotics. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.
I've been speaking with Craig Henry of Siemens Industry. Thank you very much for watching.